Thank you, Vas, and thank you, everyone. My name is Stefano, Elia. I work in Politecnico di Milano, and my subject is international business as regard both teaching and studies. So I've been on Vas since 10 years nowadays.
Maybe
So
more.
yeah, it's a lot of time, but still we preserve young, although a lot of time has passed, and we have been also in X Culture since 10 years as well. So my students take part to the X Culture Challenge, and they basically have to take part to the challenge as part of the lab investing foreign markets. And what I do every year is to provide them also with an entire course on how to organize the business plan for internationalization. And in particular, I invite external experts of international marketing, international logistics, international strategies, and they propose some tools, methodologies, some tricks on how to organize the internationalization of a company. And so the lecture that I'm going to present now is the results of what I was able to pick up from them. So some of the most relevant methodologies that you can apply also in X Culture Challenge. And it's also the results of a combination of different tools that we can use to support the internationalization of a company. Okay. I typically like to start a lecture with a business case, okay, that can be useful in understanding the content of the lecture. Okay. This is the business case of a well-known company, is Walmart. You know better than me that it's a famous American multinational company, retail corporation. And this is a company that basically has an important competitive advantage in terms of price, in terms of low cost of, let's say, organization of its activities, and in terms of prices. So the main competitive advantage of Walmart is that they can offer their products to a lower price with respect to their competitors. And what are the main sources of this competitive advantage? Why Walmart is able, in particular, to provide such an advantage to their customers in terms of pricing? The literature has identified at least three main reasons why Walmart is particularly successful in terms of offering a low price for their products. The first one is the efficiency of its distribution system. So the fact that Walmart can rely on a very efficient logistics. Okay, so Walmart can rely on a very efficient organization of its sales activity through very efficient transportation modes. And this allows to save on cost, and therefore the saving of the cost translates into a lower price. The second reason why Walmart is well known for its competitive advantage in terms of pricing is the bargaining power that it can leverage with its suppliers, because Walmart, of course, buy big amounts of products and sells them to their customers, and this allows to obtain, let's say, discounts, important discounts for their purchasing, and this translates into lower price in terms of final products sold to the customers. And finally, another reason why Walmart, according to the business literature, is particularly successful in delivering products at low price is the fact that they have quite strict HR policies, which typically do not reflect only lower wages, but also the fact that they have a strict organization, and this allow Walmart to be very efficient. Of course, there are some ethical implication from this side, but we are not doing a business ethics courses, otherwise we could discuss this issue. But definitely the fact that Walmart has a strict organization in terms of HR and also wages, which are not particularly high, allows to save on cost, and therefore this translates into lower price. So Walmart basically has three main competitive advantages, three main sources of its competitive advantage: the efficient logistics, the bargaining power with suppliers, and also the strict HR policies. And this translates into a price competitive advantage. Okay. Although Walmart, let's say, was at some point present in every, let's say, corner of the United States, at some point they decided to start investing abroad in the 90s. Why? First of all, because they realize basically that they have a very limited growth opportunity. Okay. In particular, Walmart realized at some point that they were growing they were present in every corner of the United States. Okay, let me just show you this very quick video in which you can see that Walmart basically started to be present in the United States in the middle of nowhere, let's say. They started there and then they went towards the south. Okay, here you see in the 60s, in the 70s, they started to go on the towards the south, and then they start to expand at some point towards the Atlantic coast, so to go to Florida and the United States countries, as you can see. And then they started also to go on the west and to reach the border of Mexico and to reach California, Nevada, and so on until the border with Canada. And here we are in the period of the 90s already. Okay. This video stops in the early 2000s, if I'm not wrong, 2006. And as you can see, basically at some point, Walmart was present in every corner of the United States. Therefore, basically, here is the last year, 2006. At some point, here we are. Let's go back to the presentation. Even a company like Walmart realized that they had a limited internal growth opportunity. So, although they were present into one of the largest and richest markets in the world, like the United States, they realized that they could not expand even more. And therefore, they decided to invest abroad because they wanted to expand their sales. Okay, that was the first reason. The second reason why they decided to expand is because they had a successful business model, which rely on efficient logistics, strict HR policies, and also, as we were saying, strong bargaining power. And so the idea was, if this business model is working so well in the United States, why shouldn't it work also successfully somewhere else? Okay. Then they wanted to exploit also the first mover advantage, the advantage of being the first one to internationalize into another countries, because at that time in the 90s, there were not so many retail corporations that were basically going abroad, and therefore they wanted to be the first one and to take advantage of being the first company in these industries to be also in other countries. And given these three reasons, they decided to start their expansion into Mexico, which is, of course, the nearby country. And they decided to adopt the same business model that they had in their home countries into Mexico. The main problem is that they did it without any degree of adaptation. Basically, the initial expansion of Walmart was not successful because basically they were not able to replicate their business model abroad. Okay. In particular, what happened is that, first of all, they realized that Mexico didn't have the same efficient logistics as the United States. Therefore, efficient logistics was one of the columns or the pillars of their successful business model, but they were not able to replicate this pillar into Mexico. The second problem is that, of course, at that time they were starting their internationalization, and therefore they could not exploit the bargaining power with the local suppliers in Mexico because they were buying a small amount of Mexican products. Therefore, they had the idea of selling the US products into the Mexico in order to take advantage of the bargaining power from American supplier. But the problem is that they were selling products like ice skating or tools for gardening, products that were successful in the United States, but not really useful in Mexico. So the Mexican customer didn't like this type of products, and therefore they were not successful in selling. And the third problem was that also as regard the HR policies, of course, they could take advantage of the lower wages in Mexico, but the problem is that they could not take advantage of the same efficient organization as in the United States because they did not realize that the Mexican workers at that time were not so reliable. They were not arriving on time on average. They were not, there was a high turnover of work, so they could not replicate the same efficiency in HR organization like in the United States. Okay. So Basically, the main issue was that Walmart was not able to replicate its business model as is into Mexico when it started its expansion. But the good thing is that Walmart realized that he was making mistakes in just replicating the business model, the US business model into other countries, and they learned from their own problems, from their own mistakes and errors, and they at some point decided to change their internationalization process. How? In particular, they started to make partnership with local distribution companies or other global distributors in order to replicate the distribution efficiency. So they realized that they needed some local partners to manage the logistics, and therefore they were able to replicate the logistic pillar, to recreate the logistic pillar by making partnership with local distributors. Then, as regard the bargaining power, what did they think to do? Basically, they made partnership with the global suppliers such as Unilever, Procter& Gamble, General Electric that had already in their business the production of customer goods that could be adapted to international markets, which means that basically they were able to regain the bargaining power by selling international products instead of selling American products. So they made partnership with those global suppliers that already were used to go abroad and to produce products that could adapt to the local tastes and preferences. And therefore they were able to basically regain the bargaining power as they had in the United States. And finally, they were able, in this case, to adapt to the local context also, not only in terms of product, but also in terms of cultures, in terms of laws, in terms of institution. And as a last things, they also started to learn from internationalization to understand that basically whenever you internationalize, you are able to gain knowledge abroad, and that the knowledge flows don't go only from the headquarters to the subsidiaries, but also vice versa. Just to give an example, when they opened their shops in South Korea, we have here a student from South Korea in Seoul, they didn't have enough space to build the big malls like in the United States, and they had to build a multi-floor shop. Okay. And they realized that people were spending more time in the multi-floor shop because they were curious to see every shops. Okay. Because they want to see what type of product was sold in every shop, in every floor. And they realized from the data that they were selling more than expected. And therefore, they learned that one of the best practices could be to build multi-floor shop instead of building malls. And they started to build multi-floor shops in other countries. So this is a way through which, by leveraging international business, you can learn in one country, transfer this knowledge and best practice in another country. So this story tells us that basically, whenever you are internationalizing and trying to expand your sales, you are not simply transferring a product or a service from one country to another, but you are basically trying to leverage a business model. Okay, in the case of Walmart, as I was saying, is a business model based on efficient logistics, HR policies, very strict, and bargaining power. And you need to adapt this business model to the local context. That's the idea behind this business case. Okay. In other words, basically, whenever you are undertaking an internationalization, you are going international to sell products in foreign markets. Whenever you are undertaking market seeking investments, basically, you should go through three main steps. The first step is the basically understanding of your business model. Whenever you are going abroad, and this is something that you have to do also with the X Culture Challenge, the first step is understanding basically what are the market success criteria of your product, who are the customers that are buying your product, what is the competitive pressure that you are subject to, who are your competitors, and so on and so forth. That's the first step of the internationalization. The second step is the country selection. So the first step is used in order to identify the criteria, the elements that will support you in the choice of the country. Okay, and now I will show you in a while how to do it. And the third and final step is the step of the adaptation. Is the step in which once you select your country, you go more in depth into the understanding of this country, and then you start the adaptation through the entry mode, the marketing and promotion channels, the pricing and payment methods. You decide the organization, the HR, the logistics, the financial sources, and the legal and tax issues. All these three elements should be present in what we call the business plan for internationalization. So whenever you are starting, let's say, an international business ventures, it would be better to go through all these three steps in order to understand the business model, to select the country, and then to adapt by drawing a business plan which basically provide an overall, let's say, structure of this process. Okay. So now what we are going to do is to explore each of these points and try to understand what type of tools you can use to understand your business model, to select the country, and then to adapt your business model. Okay. So this will be now the next steps. Okay. Any questions so far? Otherwise, we proceed.
Yeah, we can
Okay.
proceed. Yeah.
So let's start with the step one. It's the business model, market, and industry analysis. Okay. How can you understand the business model of your company? Okay. The most used tool is definitely the business model canvas. Okay. I'm sure that as, let's say, if you studied management and business, you have seen the business model canvas as a tool to understand your business model. It's a kind of, let's say, diagram. That is composed of different elements that you can use to better understand your business model. Okay, here you see the different components. Let's start to explore each of them. Whenever you analyze the business model of your company, the first aspect that you need to analyze is the customer segments. Okay, so who are your customers? For instance, are you selling a product that is basically for mass markets, or is a product that is sold in a niche market? Okay, here you have some example. Or are you selling a product which is homogeneous, diversified, segmented? It's multi-sided. Okay, so basically you have to identify who you are, your specific customers. Can be B2B or B2C. So you are selling to another companies or you are selling to final customers. Okay, so this is the first issues that you have to identify whenever you wanna understand your business model. The second element that you should try to identify once you understand who are your customer is what type of value proposition you are offering to your customers. Okay, you are offering a cost reduction, you are offering something new, you are offering a high performance, you are offering a reduction of your risk, you are customizing something. Okay, you are offering something that is appealing from a design point of view, a brand, a status. You are using something that is easily accessible. You are offering something that is easily accessible, that is convenient. Okay, so you need to understand what value you are proposing to your customer. So first you identify the customer, and then you identify what type of value you are offering to your customers. Then you need to understand the channel through which you deliver these values to your customers. Okay, how are you delivering? Through internet, in person, by telephone, on site, in a store, through social media, through traditional media. Okay, so it is important that you try to understand how you reach your customers. Okay, and also in particular whether you are offering also some after sales service, or you stop in the delivery, in the purchase, in the evaluation, awareness. So what particularly what type of let's say what element you are offering to your customer whenever you are reaching him, from the awareness of a product to the after sales service. Okay, because you can offer several different types of services from this point of view. As regard the customer relationship, what is important is how you try to basically interact with your customers, in particular, whether you are offering a personal assistance, okay, whether you wanna create a community, you wanna to co-create something with your customers, like in YouTube, okay, where you provide a platform and the customers create the content, whether you are offering automated services, so you are keeping the relationship through something which is automated or through activities. Okay, so it is important once you identify how you reach the customers, also to understand how you keep the relationship. And then you have the revenue stream that you should try to understand in the business model canvas, basically how you make money. So by selling assets, or by asking for a fee to use something, or through a subscription, by lending, renting, leasing something, or you are gaining money through licensing, brokeraging, advertising. So here I reported some of the possible options that you might let's say, use to make money. So it is important to understand what is revenue stream, how you make money. Okay. And this is the right side. Now we go on the left side. Okay. After you understand basically the customer segments and the values, the channels, the relationship, the revenues, we start to understand what are the key resources of your companies. For instance, if you are leveraging physical resources, intellectual resources, human resources, financial resources, what are the key resources that allow your company to be competitive? And the next step is to understand also what type of activity you are doing. You are making something, you are selling, you are supporting. Okay. That is another step that you need to understand in order to identify the business model of your company. And then we go to the partners because, of course, whenever you're doing business, you need some valuable partners and what they are offering to you. They are offering a reduction of the risk. They allow you to acquire resources and activities. They allow you to optimize something. So it is important that you identify also the strategic partners that allows you to make your business. And finally, you have the cost structure. What costs are related to the basically production phase, to the value that you're offering, and so on and so forth. Okay. So these are the different components of a business model canvas. At the end, what you should be able to do is to have something like that one. This is the example of the Google business model canvas. If you see on the right, we have different customer segments, okay? The internet users, the advertisers, the developers, and the enterprises, okay? You can even use different color for different customer segments and use the same color across the different section. For instance, for the internet user, the value proposition are free services, okay? Like Gmail, Google Maps. For the advertising, what type of value proposition you are offering? Google Advertise. For the developers, you are offering other type of values. Okay, for the enterprise, you are offering paid services. And then whenever you have channels or relationship which are common to every segment, you can use an intermediate color like the yellow here. Okay, so you see that in this case, for instance, there are different revenue streams associated to each customer segments and value proposition. Okay, while as regard the cost structure, the key partner, key activities, key resources, channels, and customer relationship, we have a yellow colors because this means that it's common across different type of customer segments. Okay, but this is a useful example of how how you could try to build the business model canvas that allows you to identify the business model of your company. That's the example of Google. Okay. And that's one of the tools, but of course you can use several other tools to understand the business model of your company. One of these one is the SWOT analysis, for instance. The SWOT analysis is another matrix that basically allow to understand what are the strengths, weaknesses, opportunity, and threats. In particular, on the, let's say, top quadrants, you see the internal analysis in which you try to understand what are the sources of your competitive advantage. Okay, like in the case of Walmart, we were mentioning the efficient distribution, the bargaining power, and the HR policies. Okay, and also your weaknesses. For instance, the lack of experience can be production costs and so on and so forth. While on the bottom line, you should try to understand the opportunities and threats. In particular, you should try to understand what are the market success criteria, to try to understand your customers, to identify who are your competitor, the supply chain, and the exit and entry barriers. How you identify the market success criteria? Basically, you try to make some analysis of the product that you are selling. For instance, if you are selling a mass product, probably the size of the market and the growth rate are particularly relevant. While if you are selling a niche or luxury product, you should look at the present or future income level of your product. Okay, just to give you an example, I remember that some years ago we hosted a luxury brand in our business school. They were starting to sell in China 10 years ago. And they were saying that they were particularly interested in the future income level of China because at that time it was growing. And so they were starting to sell, although it was not still an important market, they were witnessing on the future growth of that countries, okay, in terms not only of size but also income level. And they were not even worried about the counterfeiting, the fact that there was a parallel market in terms of fake products that were sold in China because they were sure that in the future people would have had more money available, more income, and they would have bought the real products. It was a kind of advertising for them at that time, the fake products. Other elements that might determine the success of your products could be the political legal environments. For instance, if you are pharmaceutical companies, you might be interested in definitely understanding the political and legal context of the countries in which then you are going to invest. Other elements that might be relevant for your products could be the cultural environments. For instance, if you are selling food products, it is extremely important that you understand what are the tastes and preferences of your customers, which are very different across countries due to cultural reason, to historical reason, to religious reasons, and so on and so forth. If you are selling products like ski, probably one of the elements that you should take into account is geography, okay? Because of course you cannot probably sell the ski in an island, okay, where there is no mountains. So you're selling a product like Baby K, you need to look at the demography, okay? So this is one of the elements that determine the success of your products. Okay, so these are some of the elements that you should try to understand whenever you are selling a product which is successful. And these are some of the elements that you should try to understand whether they are particularly relevant for the success of your product. How you understand who are your customers, you can use also some, let's say, tools like this one, which come from an international marketing expert who worked in Condé Nast and now works for a national Italian journal, a business journal, which is called Il Sole 24 Ore. And basically, she used this simple, let's say, tool to try to identify the type of customers. Basically, you can segment your customer based on some demographic characteristics, so based on the gender, age, occupation, or based on geographic elements, the country, state, the city of residence, based on the technographic elements, so the browser that they use, the mobile device they use, based on some behavioral elements, so the willingness to spend or the future use, the session frequency and so on, or the psychographic elements, so personal attitude, values, interests, so if a person is particularly sensitive to sustainability and so on and so forth. Okay, so some elements are difficult to be identified, and therefore in this case you can even use a survey in order to collect information about your customer. Another tools that you can use is this matrix that we have seen with our students this morning. Is a matrix that was developed by two colleagues in the end of the 80s. It's a matrix that basically allows to understand what's the best internationalization strategies based on the pressure for cost reduction and the pressure for local responsiveness that you may face on global markets. And this is the Bartlett and Goshal model. And you have four different approaches to internationalization that I'm not going into because it would require too much time. But what is important is to understand whether you are subject to a strong pressure for cost reduction or local responsiveness, and also to map your competitors by using a positioning map, for instance. This is another tool that you can exploit whenever you're trying to understand your competitors. What does it mean? It means that you select two important relevant dimensions. So for instance, in this case, we are mapping the car producer based on two dimensions. The first one is whether the car is sporty or a family car, and the other one based on whether it's a luxury or economy type of car. And then you can position your own company in this map if you are an automotive company. So otherwise, if you are another type of company, you select other criteria and you position your company in this map. And finally, the last tool that you can use in this first stage, remember that we are still discussing the first step of internationalization, is the Porter Five Forces model. Okay, this is a well-known model which allows you to basically understand the bargaining power of the buyers and of the suppliers, whether there is a threat of substitute products, and also whether there is a threat of new entrants, and also who are your present competitors. So this is a very famous type of tool that you can use in order to better understand basically the relationship with buyers and suppliers, and the possible substitute product and possible entrants. So those ones that I showed to you are all tools that you can use to understand the business model of a company, starting from the business model canvas to the SWOT analysis, to the understanding of the market success criteria, the positioning map, and the Porter's Five Forces. These are all tools that allows you to identify basically the business model of your companies, the competitors, the customers, and the characteristic of your products. And these are particularly relevant because it allows you to understand basically your company. And this is the first step of internationalization. And then we go to the second step, which is the market selection. So this is the most important step because it's the moment in which you decide in what country to invest. In particular, once you have analyzed your company, you have identified the most relevant criteria for your company, what you do is to follow this step. First of all, you identify a proxy for each of the criteria that, in your opinion, are particularly relevant for the success of your product and your company. That's the first element. Then you assign a weight to each of them, and you choose some countries that meet these success criteria. You can use one of these criteria to identify the most promising countries, for instance. Then you try to assign a score to each of the criteria for each country. And then in case you might also evaluate the risk associated to each country. That's something that I will show you later how to do. And then you make a ranking based on this score and weights. Okay. So basically, this is how you try to select a country. And in particular, what you get at the end is a single country that you select, thanks to the fact that you have a ranking based on these criteria. The final output basically that you have is a matrix like this one, okay? So how this matrix works? On the columns, what you find is the main criteria that you have identified as being particularly relevant for your company. For instance, in this case, we have a company who is selling some skincare products, and therefore the market volumes in terms of skincare products is one of the most relevant criteria. They were interested also to the market growth, willingness to pay, the distances, the export opportunity that made it in Italy relevant because it was an Italian company, the ease of market access, and the sustainability sensitivity. Okay, so these are the criteria that, based on the analysis of the first step, were identified as being particularly relevant for this specific company. Then, as you can see in the second column, they identify some proxies through which they can measure each of these criteria. So for the market volume, they identify the revenue in the natural skincare market Okay. For the willingness to pay, the average revenue per capita in natural skin, for instance. Distance, they use the cage framework. Okay, I will tell you in a while what is it. The export opportunity, they use an export opportunity index and so on and so forth. So what is important is that you identify a proxy for each of these criteria. And then in the third column, they also assign a weight. Okay, for instance, for them, the most relevant criteria were the market volume and the willingness to pay, 20% of weight, followed by market growth, 50%, distance, 50%, while less relevant is the ease of market access and also the made in Italy relevance. Even lower is the relevance of export opportunity and sustainability sensitivity in this case. And then they identify uh, these countries, Japan, US, South Korea, Spain, Germany, and France, as being the most promising based on the first criteria. So they took into account the first countries in terms of market volumes, and then they evaluate each of these countries based on each success criteria. Okay, so for instance, in the case of Japan, the market volume is 2,974, and they assigned a score of 5 because it's a very high value. In the case of the United States, the value is 2,506 and the score assigned is 5. In the case of South Korea, for instance, the market volume is lower, is 1,284, and therefore they assigned a score of 4. Okay, in Spain is even lower. They assign a scale of 3, and so on and so forth. The same for the next criteria, market growth. What they do is to assign 4 to Japan because the growth is lower than in the United States, which is 5. Okay, and so on and so forth. So for each of these criteria, they basically assign a different score, and they finally get a total score that identify each country. So for instance, for Japan, they had a 3.3, for the US 3.35, South Korea 3.15, Spain 3.80, Germany 3.6, and France 3.7. And therefore, they decided to invest in Spain. The selected country is Spain because it's the country that basically was able to obtain the highest score. So basically, this is the output that you should have whenever you start selecting a country. So a scorecard, a matrix that allows you to provide a visualization of why you selected a specific country based on the criteria selected in the first stage. Okay. As regard the distance, the cage framework basically is a framework that was developed by Gamer Watt, one of our colleagues, that basically identify 4 main elements to assess the distance: the cultural distance, the administrative distance, the geographic distance, the economic and wealth distance. Okay. And this is basically the core of the internationalization process, so the identification of the countries through this scorecard matrix. And these are some of the possible sources for the market selection that you can use in order to provide a score to each of the different criteria that you will identify. And these slides then will be available, and you will have the opportunity to use these and other sources. In this stage, you can also make an evaluation of the risk of your investments by using basically the typical net present value formula. This is something that typically is not required in ex-culture, but it is particularly important that you provide also some, let's say, some information about whether the investment is profitable or not by assessing the future cash flow and then by applying a discount rate. And typically the discount rate is computed through the weighted average cost of capital. This is something quite complex that I'm not going to explain in details because it would require a lot of time. But this formula basically are used by risk managers in order to assess the risk of an international investment. In particular, they try to provide an evaluation of the cost of equity by using the capital asset pricing model and by trying to assess the premium that you gain from the difference between the market revenues and the revenues that you gain on the risk-free markets. And what you can do is to modify this formula by introducing, for instance, the country default spread in order to assess the international risk. So this is a single slide that provide you some formula on how to assess the risk. But typically, in this case, what you do is to involve some expert that can support you in computing the future cash flow and to estimate the weighted average cost of capital and the cost of equity by introducing also the international risk through the country default spread. That's something that we cannot go in depth because it requires a lot of time, and also, as you can see, it requires a lot of data in order to address. And finally, we have the third step, which is the analysis of the selected market, is the adaptation side. It's the last step of the internationalization, and it's probably that one that requires much more attention, because once you have analyzed the company, once you have selected the countries, now it's time to adapt your business to the host countries. Remember that a company like Walmart didn't do it at the beginning of its internationalization. We are talking about a big multinational companies nowadays, big companies, and they made this mistake, but then they adjusted basically the process, and now they are internationalizing with some degree of adaptation. So that's the most important part. So once you have selected a country, for instance, you have selected Spain, what you can do is to analyze more in depth your countries by using, for instance, a pestle analysis. Pestles means that you try to understand the political characteristics, the economic characteristics, social, technological, environmental, and legal aspects which are specific of your host countries. But then another suggestion that I provide whenever you have selected a country is to use the tools that you have employed in the first step of internationalization and to adapt in order to adapt the business model to the host countries. For instance, you can use the business model canvas or the SWOT analysis or the competitors map, or also the Porter's five forces, and to decline this tool in the host countries. Let me give you an example. This is the business model canvas that was done by a student, a colleague like yours, during one past wave of X-Culture. She was basically managing the internationalization, a Colombian company that was selling jewels. And this is the business model canvas in Colombia, okay, that she decided to fill in. At some point, after going through the second step, she decided to invest in the US, okay? And what she did is to adjust the business model canvas based on the countries in which they have decided to invest. So, as you can see, she highlighted the things that changed, that need to be basically modified whenever you invest in the United States. So she changed the customer segments, she changed the value proposition, she changed part of the customer relationship, several channels, the key activities, and the key partners, but she didn't change the key resources. So you see that these tools that we have used in the first step can be used also in the last step in order to adapt your business model, okay? And you can do the same with the competitors. For instance, the competitive maps. You use a competitor's maps in the host countries. So you try to map the competitors in the host countries, or with the SWOT analysis, and so on and so forth. Then you have to deal with the entry mode choice. At some point, you have to decide how to enter in a country. You can use different tools. This comes from X-Culture, for instance. It's an overview of the different entry mode based on the risk, based on the experience, based on the control and on the investments that you have to basically undertake. So the more you move along the diagonal, the more the control that is required, the more the risk that you bear, the more the experience that typically is required, the more the investment that you have to apply from the export to the sales subsidiaries. And this is another matrix that you can use to select the entry mode. For instance, comparing the market potential with the country risk. And in this matrix, you see that, for instance, whenever you have a high market potential and low country risk, say subsidiaries could be probably the best option. But if the country risks start to be high, probably it's better to share the risk with the joint ventures or using agents. While if the potential is low, it's probably better to rely on agent distributor if the country risk is low, or on licensing if it's high, or you can use export, for instance. This is another matrix that you can use which rely on the product. In particular, if you have products which are particularly expensive, which need to be customized, probably agents are better than distributors. Distributors are a good choice whenever you have a stock item or whenever you need to provide after-sales services. Sales subsidiaries, for instance, can be a good option regardless of the type of products, and also it allows you to protect the intellectual property content if you are selling a knowledge-intensive type of products. And here there is another matrix that I'm not going to explain in details, but it gives you an overview of the relationship between different strategic, let's say, priorities and different types of entry mode. For instance, if one of your strategic priorities is the speed of entry, sales subsidiaries is probably not the best option because sales subsidiaries requires time and therefore it slows down your entries, while joint venture is quicker, definitely, okay, than a sales subsidiaries, although it entails other risks. So you see that based on the type of priority, you can see what is the best way to enter into account. And this is related to the entry mode choice. Now we go to the marketing. That's one of the most important part whenever you're internationalizing and also in X culture, because you need to deal with several different issues. First of all, the language. Okay, so nowadays we have several tools that support you in language translation, so in particular AI tools. But of course, you still have to pay attention because you know that AI is full also of hallucination. Okay, so what is important is to understand to what extent you can use the same marketing materials, to what extent you need to translate. How to avoid translation blunders. Like in this case, this is a famous epic failure in which a big multinational company from the north of Europe wanted to promote its vacuum, okay? And basically they tried to promote these products by saying nothing sucks like an Electrolux. But you know that nothing sucks like an Electrolux in English, in the Anglo-Saxon language means something different, okay? Nothing is bad like an Electrolux, while they wanted to say that nothing is able to basically absorb like an Electrolux, okay? So this is something that is an epic fail that comes from a big multinational company. We are not talking about a small, medium enterprise. So think how much is easy to make mistakes like this one, okay? Another issue whenever you're doing international marketing is branding. What type of brand do you want to have? You want to have a global branding or a local branding or something between, okay? So one of the most difficult issues, for instance, is whenever you invest in China. So I give you one of the most difficult situations. For instance, there are some brands like Adidas and Big Bubble who decided to adopt a phonetical translation. Okay, so for instance, Adidas is Adida and Big Bubble is Bipa Bao. Okay, so they try to replicate the same sounding. Okay, some others, for instance, decided to give a literal translation. So in the case of Apple, is Pinguo, okay, which means apple, and Nestle is Kuechao, which is nest. While some others decided to adopt a symbolic translation, something that partially is replicating the sounding but has also meaning, like BMW, which is Bauma, which is precious horse, and Reebok, which is Ruibu, quick step. Okay, so branding is another important decision that you need to make whenever you are investing abroad, whether you want a global brand or local brand. Okay, like for instance, Unilever and Procter & Gamble are developing several different type of brands for the same products. Okay, the culture, of course, it is extremely important to adjust the message in order to fit the local culture. Okay, there are some culture which are more collective, some culture which are more individualistic. Okay, so if your culture is more collective, you should emphasize the family, the friends. If it's more individualistic, you should emphasize the success, the personal goals, the self-expressions. Okay. And you need to understand also the meaning of the symbols, of the colors in the cultures. This is another epic phase by the United Airlines. they were promoting a new flights from Hong Kong using these white flowers. But the problem is that in several Asian cultures, the white flower is associated with bad luck or even death. Okay, so can you imagine promoting a flight with flowers that reminds you the death? Probably is not the best option, especially I mean, if you believe in bad luck. Okay. And therefore, this is another epic fail. We are not speaking about a small medium enterprise. We are speaking about a big airline companies like United Airlines. Okay. And these are, for instance, some of the tools that you can use to map the culture of a country. This is the Lewis model, for instance. This model is used, for instance, by the marketing managers who come in class to explain to my students how to set up the international marketing campaign of a company. It seems to reflect some stereotypes, but basically these tools was developed based on some scientific studies. Basically, they classify three different main types of culture. The linear active, who are those ones that typically are more factual, more planners, like the German, Swiss, and Luxembourg cultures, like UK and US, okay? We have the multi-active cultures, who are those ones that are more emotional, loquacious, impulsive, like the South Europe or South American countries. And then we have the reactive cultures, those ones that typically are more compromiser, good listener, okay, more accommodating, and this is typical of Asian, Far East cultures like China, Japan, Vietnam, Korea, for instance, okay? So it seems similar to stereotyping, but basically it comes from some sociological studies. And then there is also the Hofstede cultural dimension. Hofstede is used both in the scientific research and also in business. Hofstede was working in IBM. This afternoon we discussed the case of IBM, or this morning. And at some point, he gained a lot of experience with different cultures. He realized that he could gain much more money by opening its own consultancy company. Okay. And basically, he developed some dimensions, a tool, a dimension, some dimension in order to map the different cultures based on six different elements. So, for instance, the long-term versus short-term orientation, the masculinity versus femininity attitude, the tolerance of uncertainty, the level of individuality versus collectivism, the power distance, and indulgence versus restraint. Okay, so basically what he did is to assign different scores for each of these dimensions to the different countries, and then you can compute the distance between two countries based on these scores. Okay, it's called the Oxford cultural distance, but also other colleagues like Jonathan Doe developed some distance measures. Okay. And here it's another tools that you can use in your future, which basically gives you an idea of what's the meaning of each colors, okay, how its colors is interpreted in each culture. Every circle is a different area of the world. So, for instance, the external circles is Western America. The second circle is Japan. The third one is Hindu. While every ray reflects an emotion, like the ray number one is anger, the second one is creativity, the third one is authority. And it tells you what is the color associated to each of these emotions in each geographic areas, in order to avoid that you use the white flowers to promote flights, knowing that white in Asia is associated to death. Okay, this is a tool that you can use in the future in order to emphasize some colors, and you can use also index culture, of course, a challenge in order to understand how to emphasize some colors that reflect maybe a value that you are proposing with your company. So you have analyzed your company, you have identified that you are offering a specific type of value, and then you emphasize a color associated to this value. You find the value, the emotions here. Okay, so this is another interesting tool. And finally, in the international marketing adaptation, you have to care also about the packaging, okay? Packaging adaptation and regulation, okay? Because there might be different rules concerning the packaging, concerning the labels, concerning the information that you have to provide, but also different size in terms of packaging based on the local distributor facilities. Okay. So, for instance, if you are selling a tins of a cans, a tins, okay, maybe you use a tins which is too high and that does not fit into the fridge of the distributors, okay? And this happened with Coca-Cola, for instance. Coca-Cola at some point changed the shape of the tins that was smaller. At some point, it became bigger. But Coca-Cola is so powerful that basically obliged all distributors, all shops of restaurants all over the world to change the fridge, okay, to adapt the fridge, okay. So unless you are Coca-Cola and you decide the shape of your product and you impose this shape to all the distributor, you probably have to adapt your packaging to the distributor of the host countries. Maybe you are selling a very good product, but this product doesn't fit the fridge. Okay, so that's why it is important to understand also whether you need some adaptation in the packaging, not only in the labels, in the names, but also in the shape, in the size of your package. Okay, what else? The channels through which you want to promote your products are another important decision to make. You can use traditional channels, TV and radio, which is expensive, but it's very useful if you are selling mass product. The B2C or B2B periodicals, okay, especially if you are selling something very specific. You can use professional conference and exhibition, especially for B2B. You can use procurement departments of the companies, especially in B2B. But of course, nowadays, you cannot retain from using digital channels, not only professional mailing lists, but also online advertising, social media, e-commerce platform, and so on and so forth. Okay, so definitely you need some expertise in terms of digital marketing. And if you don't have, you need to gain or you need to hire someone who is expert. How you select the channels. First of all, you should try to understand what is your primary objective when you are doing a promotion channel strategy. Whether you want to build brand awareness, repositioning, your loyalty, you want to engage the customers, you want to increase the conversion rate, and so on and so forth. And then you should ask some question in order to select the promotion channel. For instance, what is the budget that I need to allocate? Because every channel has a specific budget. Okay, some channels are more expensive, like the TV, for instance. Where my customers collect information about the products, because once I know where they basically collect the information, I make advertising on the channel. Which kind of communication should be used? Okay. And what channel can be used? For instance, you know that in China, not all channels that are available in the Western countries are indeed possible to be used, okay? Can be used. So these are some of the questions that you should ask in order to identify the best channel to sell your product. And now we go to the pricing. At some point, you have to decide what price to apply to your product. Here, I identify four main different types of pricing. Let's start from the second one. The second one is the cost plus pricing. I also introduced a formula that you can use. This is basically a formula that allows you to sum the different costs of the production plus a markup that you want to use. Okay. And that's the easiest probably because once you identify the different cost component, you just add the markup and you have the cost plus pricing. But then if you are selling a product which is perceived as being valuable, okay, you remember this morning with the students, we were discussing about how to differentiate your product and to increase the perception of your product, you have to quantify this value added that you are providing, okay? And that's probably the most difficult part. So if you are able to differentiate the product, to make the product perceived as being superior compared to that one of other competitors, you can increase further the price by adding a value-based pricing. So by adding something more that reflects the value that you are proposing. You can use a break-even price whenever you want to enter into a market. You want to just try to gain market shares, when you want to have an aggressive strategy. Okay, in this case, basically, you are just recovering the cost, and this could be a good strategies in the initial phase whenever you want to build your market share, but then at some point, of course, you have to also gain money. Or you can use a target return price in which you set up your return on investment target objective, and you introduce it into the price. So these are some formulas that you can use in order to decide your pricing. But the pricing is not only a matter of how much. So it's not only a matter of deciding the value of your product, but it's also a matter of using some tricks, some tactics that makes your product more appealing. For instance, to reduce the left digit by one, so selling at 1.99 instead of 2. This is a psychological price that attracts the much more the attention. Okay, you know that it is largely used. Another tactic is to separate the additional cost. For instance, instead of saying the total price is $18 plus free shipping, you can say it's $15. But then there is 2.99, so you're using also the first tactic of shipping, which is not my fault. It's the price because you are located somewhere, okay? And this makes the price more appealing. And finally, you can use, and this is another tactics, the daily equivalence or the monthly equivalence. Instead of saying it will cost you 14.99 per month, you will pay only 0.49 per day. And this seems a very low price compared to 14.99. Okay, so the daily or monthly equivalent instead of providing the overall prices that you are paying. These are some tactics that are used in order to grab the attention of the customer as regard the pricing. And then there is the payment option. Of course, you need to, at some point, to transfer the money, okay? And therefore, you have to decide how to basically obtain your money. And what is important in this case is to try to identify the payment instrument which reflect your priorities. So first of all, which are the available ones? What are the preferences of the customers? Then you have to understand what are the fees associated to each payment option, the speed, the safety, and so on and so forth. Okay, so here you have some possible options like credit cards, debit cards, the checks, PayPal, the e-wallet, Western Union, and so on and so forth. What do experts suggest as regard the payment option? Typically, it's better to accept as many as possible, but it is better to rely on one or few suppliers, okay, one or few service provider, let's call, in order to decrease the complexity. So instead of having one provider for credit cards, one for checks, one for PayPal, and so on and so forth, try to basically have one or two main providers in order to decrease the complexity of managing different payment options. Okay? This is the main suggestion that managers that come to class give to the students. What about the organization? Okay, so once you have decided to sell abroad in a specific countries, you have organized the marketing campaign, the branding, and so on and so forth, you need to manage this international operation. So typically, the small medium enterprise organize themselves by creating an international operation division. Okay, so this is the easiest way. Sometimes there is just a single person, the basically international business specialist, okay, who manage the export manager, who manage the operation. But whenever the business becomes more relevant, probably at some point you have to decide whether you want to organize by geographic areas. And this is particularly suggested whenever you need to give importance to the local adaptation, or you can organize by product in case you need to emphasize the efficiency, the cost reduction, and you have global value chains. Or you can decide to build a matrix. This is probably the most complex type of organization where you have both the geographic dimension and also the product dimension. And if you are in the middle, for instance, between the geographic dimension and the product dimension, you might receive different type of insights. For instance, the country manager typically wants to adapt to the local context, and this implies spending money, while the product managers typically wants to reduce the cost, and this requires standardization. So you have to balance these two different types of requests. What about the human resource management? Okay, not only you have to deal with the organization, but also you have to understand how to manage the resources. You remember in the case of Walmart, there was initially some problems as regard the organization in Mexico. So what you should consider, first of all, you have to understand the labor laws, especially if you are hiring someone locals. You have to decide how many locals and how many expats you want to have. Okay. What is the best way to recruit local people? The compensation, okay, the typical salary, what is the compensation structure, and also the performance management, how you want to create an incentive for your local workers. And there are huge differences. I give you an example of a colleague of ours that for sure Basil knows very well. I'm not going to give the name. There is a colleague of ours who was working in the United States in a university, and he used to receive let's say, extra funds whenever he was publishing on top journals, okay? Because in the university where he was working, basically he was receiving an extra funds due to the fact that he was successful in publishing on top journal. At some
But
point,
only
he
in
moved in
FTPT.
North European countries, in particular in Norway, okay? And again, he was publishing on successful on top journals. And when it arrives the time to distribute the funds, he received less funds than the others. Okay. And he was complaining, he said, why? I'm publishing on top journals and you are giving me less funds. And the answer is yes, because those ones that were not successful need more resources in order to become successful as you are. So it's the opposite, you see, way of managing performance. Okay. So it seems weird, but it's exactly the opposite way. So that's why it is important to understand also how to manage human resources and the performance. Okay. Let's go to the logistics. We are close to the end. We have the last 10 minutes. Okay. Whenever you select logistics, you have to deal with different alternatives, right? Road, rail, sea, air. And first of all, you have to decide based not only on the cost, okay, but also on the delivery time, accessibility. So, for instance, the sea is the less costly, but it's also the slower, while air is the faster, but is the most expensive. So, how do typically companies try to have both a low cost and also the availability of the products overseas? Because maybe you select the cost option, but then the customer is unhappy because he has to wait for a long time before having its goods, its product. For instance, you are a European company who are selling to a US customers and you decide to ship and the US customer has to wait 1 month, 2 months before having its product. He gets angry and decided to just send back the product. Okay. How can you avoid this situation? For instance, if still you want to save on cost, you can have a local warehouse or a local shop in the US so that whenever the customer buy the stuff, you have the availability and periodically of the goods, and periodically you ship the goods from Europe to the US so that you can exploit the low cost of the ships. At the same time, you have also the stock, the warehouse from which you can source in order to sell the products to the local customer. Okay. Whenever you are dealing with the transportation and logistics, you have also to pay attention to the customs, especially in this period, okay, in which we have, again, the tariffs in place, and you need to understand how much time you need to go through the customs. And there is, for instance, this website from the World Bank that gives you the information about the number of documents that you need to export or to import, the time to export, the time to import, and so on and so forth. Okay? Also, another element that you have to understand, especially for the final pricing, is the amount of the duties. You know that the duties typically depends on three elements. The classification of goods. So some goods are classified in a way and they have specific duties. Some others are other type of goods, so high value, low value. So there are different types of tariffs. The country of origin. So they are particularly in this period, you can see that tariffs have been applied based on the country of origin. And finally, the value of the good, okay? And the final duty rate can depend on the basically ad valorem duty, okay? So basically can be a percentage of the value of the products, can be specific based on the count of the products, or can be a mixed duty. So it is important that you understand what type of duties is applied, because you have to add it to the final price of your product. And also because you need to understand how much time you need to go through the customs. And then another issue that you have to understand, that's something that typically logistic companies can support you in understanding better, are the Incoterms. What are the Incoterms? The Incoterms are the international rules that decide, that define the responsibility and the risk of the buyer and seller during international transaction. So it is important to understand to what extent you are responsible during the transportation, whether you are responsible, whether the customer is responsible, or whether the logistic company. Okay, so that's something that you need to understand whenever, in particular, you are interacting with a logistic company, because these are international rules that have been updated last time in 2020. They work since 1936. Okay. Last but one, the financial resources you need also to understand how to support your internationalization. This is a slides that come from a CFO that teach in my lab, and that try to provide an overview of what are the best funding options that you can use in the different phase of expansion. In particular, the early phase is that one of the seed startup first stage, in which you can use different type of sources like crowdfunding, entrepreneur subsidies, friends, business angel, incubators, and so on and so forth. The expansion phase is that one that typically involve the internationalization. In this case, company prefer to use venture capital, private equity, loans, subsidies, and so on and so forth. And then you can go on and go to the stock market, public to private, and so on and so forth. So it is important to understand also how you support from a financial point of view your growth. And that's the last slide, in which you have to deal with the legal and fiscal issues. In particular, unless you are an expert or you have an expert in-house, you need to rely on an expert concerning the contracts, the privacy, the litigation. Let me give you an example. I have a lawyer who come in my class, in my lab, that explained to the students the case of Amazon versus Kodak. At some point, they were selling a product online with a wrong price, both. Okay, they were selling a product, for instance, at 9.99 instead of being 99.9. So they set up a wrong price, and of course, the customers, whenever they saw that this product were so convenient, they started to buy them. At some point, they realized that they made this mistake. This happened in two different periods of the history. Okay, they stopped the sales and they say, sorry, we are not able to sell you this product because we made a mistake. The problem is that the customers decided to make a class action and to ask for their products. And at the end, Amazon was able to win, while Kodak was not able and had to sell its product at that price. Why? Because the terms and condition of the sales were different. In particular, Kodak was applying the old traditional sales terms and conditions, which legally are called offer to supply. So whenever basically you are selling a product and whenever a customer is buying the product, this is a binding contract in which you need to sell the product. You cannot go back. This is called the offer to supply. I'm offering you something. I'm offering you a product, and if you buy it, it's done. Okay. While the other company, Amazon, in that case was using different terms of condition, which are called invitation to treat from a legal point of view. What does it mean? It means that whenever I'm selling a product, I'm just inviting you to treat. So if you are accepting what I'm proposing, this doesn't mean that I will sell you, because I'm proposing you a product at 9.95. You accept, but I say, okay, sorry, I change my mind, because it's an invitation to treat, not an offer to supply. And therefore, it's not a binding contract. Okay, nowadays, most of the companies have an invitation to treat terms and condition. Okay, but at that time, they hadn't. So that's why it is important to rely on a very expert type of legal uh, assistance. Then again, counterfeiting, you have to pay attention whether you are violating copyrights or what are the risks that your product will be copied by competitors. You need to find also some assistance to manage taxation, transfer pricing in order to minimize, let's say, to optimize, let's say, the tax payments. And finally, whenever the markets become particularly relevant, you should consider whether to have a representative in the host countries. So this is something that only an expert can tell you and can suggest to do. So whether to have a subsidiary is an expert in your host country. Okay, that's all from my side. What I wanted to give you as a main message is that we cannot be expert of all these elements. Internationalization is very complex and requires to be aware that there are all these issues to be managed. You cannot expect to be an expert, but you need to be aware that these are the complexities that you need to manage. And whenever you don't have the expertise, you need to rely on a strong partner that allows you to overcome this complexity. Okay? So that's all. So in order to avoid that you look like the Joker, it's probably better to have a plan whenever, okay, you are internationalizing, you're doing international business. Okay, that's all. Let me stop the presentation so that we can collect information. We can collect questions in case we have it in the chat.
And
Okay.
it does, yeah, does look like, oh, that's more comments, yeah.
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 Shall I read it, Vaz?
Sure, yeah. Well, if Michael left some comments, I see, yes.
Oh, let me see.
Yeah, it's on some things that you talked about earlier. I agree with you that it's complicated and it's important. Sometimes people do assume that just because they know one little thing, they know everything, and that's problematic. So yes, definitely the case.
Okay.
I really liked your examples going back to marketing. So that's clever. And yeah, you would think that okay, well, a small company may not realize that the color or the logo or the slogan, it's something there may be misinterpreted in one of the cultures. But apparently,
Mhm.
even larger companies make those mistakes. And one of the values of X culture that I see is that by having people in all those different cultures, we may be able to spot those problems, not because our students are so smart, but because if you are there, you feel it right away. You know right away that the white collar or whatever, not any American would immediately say nothing sucks like an Electrolux is a bad slogan.
Yeah,
But
indeed.
those who study the language literally, so to speak, yeah, makes sense. It's a vacuum cleaner. It does suck.
Yeah.
So, but yes, so that's where X culture may be sometimes more useful than experts because you can have the most talented consultants in, I don't know, Italy or Germany, and they may not, catch that little nuance. Same thing going the other way around. So I'm sure there are some American translations into Italian that sound wrong to to an Italian. So yes.
Yeah.
Or
Indeed.
politics, the same thing. You need to feel those nuances, what's appropriate, what's not. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed. Okay. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Yes, I'm not sure. Antonius, do you have any comments, questions?
I want to thank Stefano. It was a great lecture for us. I don't know if the audience has any questions. Maybe we can take the next 10 minutes to answer questions. Well, to give Stefano the opportunity to answer
And while,
questions.
yeah,
Yeah.
and while the
May-
audience, yeah, oh, I see.
Maybe I can add just one small things because we didn't discuss about the role of AI in this
Mm.
internationalization process. In particular, as regard the matrix, you remember the matrix that I was
Yeah,
showing
yeah.
concerning the selection of the countries. There are, of course, AI tools that can support you in designing this matrix. For instance, there is a Google Market Find. It's called Market Finder. It's a tool from Google that supports you in this sense. There is a platform which is called Matchplat that allows you to identify the best countries and the best B2B partners. Amazon, Alibaba have their own AI. So, I mean, definitely there are AI tools. What is important, the message that I was giving to my student is that you should use it in a smart way, not to substitute your work,
Yeah,
but just to augment what you are doing. So in
as an
order to
assistant.
complement, to give ideas. So what is important is to give the right prompts and to interact in a smart way, in a way that you are able at the end to refine your work and to compare your manual work with what the machine gives you back, to augment your manual work. So my suggestion is to use it, but in a smart way. There are several tools available nowadays. I have a student who is working on the development of a specific AI tool that support the internationalization of the companies. And there is another student that I'm supervising who works in a company that is developing an AI platform for the internationalization of the company. So definitely it will be the future, but all of them says it's not enough, okay? You need to, of course, complement this work with the human brain, basically. That's the idea with them. No.
Very true. Well, so then thank you so much for your time. I'm sure you have better things to do on a Saturday
Okay.
during the Olympic Games that happen in New
Yeah.
York City. So send us a lot of photos from if you visit any of the
I will,
competitions.
yes.
Right. Well, thank you.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much, Professor.
Okay. Thank you. Bye-bye.
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 Thank you very much, Stefano. It was
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Antonis. Bye-bye. Okay.